Today, we're going to take a look at gnomes as we continue on our series of role-playing tips on how to play various species within the D&D multiverse. So in this video, we're going to go through what the 2024 Player's Handbook tells us about gnomes, how that lore is represented mechanically, and then using both of those tidbits of information as inspiration, I'm going to take you through my favorite bit, which is some questions that you can ask yourself to further cement your character into the lore around gnomes and to make them feel different, perhaps, from the other species in the game. So, what does the 2024 Player's Handbook tell us about gnomes? First of all, they are a petite folk with big eyes and pointed ears. That's how you can tell the difference between a gnome, for example, and a halfling. A halfling is like a diminutive human, whereas gnomes do look a little bit different. Those big eyes, those pointed ears, really making them stand out. They typically live to around 425 years old, so they completely outlive humans as well. And many gnomes enjoy having a roof over their heads, and even if that roof is just a hat, is something that they decide to put into the player's handbook, I suppose just to demonstrate the whimsy that gnomes have. They always want something over their head, it would seem. Also, the D&D 2024 Player's Handbook tells us that gnomes are magical folk that were created by the gods of invention, illusions, and life underground. And the early gnomes were actually secretive species living in forests and burrows and the like. And they are known for their cleverness rather than particularly their size. They have used traps and labyrinthine tunnels to outwit many a predator. So they are not just a diminutive folk, but also very smart indeed. And gnomes actually have access to magic, which they learned from the gods, like Gull Glittergold, Bearvan, Wild Wanderer, and Baravar Cloak Shadow. And they have been granted this magic by their gods. And these gods often have visited gnomes in disguise during the past in the lore of the D&D multiverse, teaching them both skills and how to tap into this magic. This divine magic gave rise to the two primary gnome lineages. There are two types of gnome, at least mentioned in the 2024 Player's Handbook, which are forest gnomes, which are known for their connection to nature and specifically illusion magic. And then you have rock gnomes, which are more renowned for their invention and their tinkering. We have all of this lore about gnomes that is mentioned in the 2024 Player's Handbook. How is some of this represented mechanically within the game? First of all, they are a humanoid creature. They are small in size, about 3 to 4 feet tall, and they have a speed of 30 feet, which brings them in line with most of the species within the 2024 Player's Handbook. They also are in possession of dark vision, up to a range of 60 feet, and they also have the gnomish cunning ability, which gives them advantage on intelligence, wisdom, and charisma saving throws. Basically, on any personality-based ability, they're going to have advantage on. Very useful, particularly if you're going up against something like a Mind Flare is going to target one of those. They also have their gnomish lineage. You're going to choose one of the options of gnomish lineage of forest or rock gnome, and whichever one you choose, intelligence, wisdom, or charisma, is your spellcasting ability for the spells you cast with that trait, which is something that you'll choose when you select the lineage. If you are a forest gnome, you know the minor illusion cantrip, and you also always have the speak with animals spell prepared, which you can cast without a spell slot a number of times equal to your proficiency bonus, which at level 1 would be 2. So you'd be able to cast that 2 times and regain all expended uses when you finish a long rest. So twice per day, essentially, minimum, you'll be able to cast Speak with Animals for no cost. And you can also use any spell slots you have to cast that spell as well. If you do have spell slots, because you're a wizard, for example, you can also tap into that to cast that spell. Again, talking about these spells, just a quick look at Minor Illusion. It is a cantrip. It takes an action to cast within 30 feet, and it has somatic and material components. Somatic being like hand gestures, and material components as well, which I actually cut off what that would be. But in this instance, so long as you've got a spellcasting focus or a spell component pouch, that's probably covered. It lasts for a minute. It is an illusion, And basically you create a sound or an image of an object within range that lasts for the duration. If a creature takes a study action to examine the sound or image, the creature can determine that it is an illusion with a successful investigation check against your spell save DC. And if a creature discerns the illusion for what it is, it becomes faint to the creature. So it's still there, but essentially they can see through it. If you create a sound, its volume can range from a whisper to a scream. It can be your voice or someone else's, a lion's roar, a beating of drums, or any other sound that you choose. And it continues unabated throughout the duration, in this case a minute. And you can make discrete sounds at different times before the spell ends. And if it is an image you're creating, it can be an image of an object, such as a chair, muddy footprints, or a small chest, and it must be no larger than a 5-foot cube. The image can't create sound, light, smell, or any other sensory effect. With minor illusion, you can only create an image of an object. You cannot create an image of a creature. And again, any physical interaction with the image reveals it to be an illusion, since things can pass through it. In terms of speak with animals, it's a first level spell, takes an action. This has verbal and somatic components, so magic words and magic gestures, no material components required, and lasts for 10 minutes. From the School of Divination, which allows you to comprehend and verbally communicate with beasts, and you can use any of the influence action skill options with them. Most beasts have little say about topics that don't pertain to survival or companionship, but at minimum, a beast can give you information about nearby locations and monsters, including whatever it has perceived within the past day. If you are a rock gnome now, you know the mending and prestidigitation cantrips. In addition, you can spend 10 minutes casting prestidigitation to create a tiny clockwork device, which has an armor class of 5 and 1 hit point, such as a toy, a fire starter, or a music box. And when you create the device, you determine its function by choosing one effect from prestidigitation, which we'll come to in a moment, and the device produces that effect whenever you or another creature takes a bonus action to activate it with a touch. If the chosen effect has options within it, you choose one of those options for the device when you create it. For example, if you choose the spell's Ignite Extinguish effect, you determine whether the device ignites or extinguishes fire. The device doesn't do both. You can have 3 such devices in existence at a time, and each falls apart 8 hours after its creation or when you dismantle it with a touch as a utilize action. So a little gadget, essentially, which very much falls in line with the tinkering narrative of the rock gnomes. So let's take a look at these spells. Mending, a cantrip that takes 1 minute to cast. You have to touch the item, and it requires verbal, somatic, and material components. So magic words, magical gestures, apparently 2 lodestones to cast. It's instantaneous from the transmutation school, which allows you to repair a single break or tear in an object that you touch, such as a broken chain link, 2 halves of a broken key, a torn cloak, or a leaking wineskin. As long as the break or tear is no larger than 1 foot in any dimension, you mend it, leaving no trace of the former damage. This spell can physically repair a magic item, but it can't restore magic to such an object. If a magic item has lost its magical ability, for example, it can't restore that, but if it's got a chip in it, for example, it could. And also prestidigitation is a cantrip, takes 1 action within 10 feet and requires verbal and somatic components. So again, magic words or gestures, lasts for an hour from the transmutation school. You can create a magical effect within range, in this case 10 feet, choosing the effect from the options below. If you cast the spell multiple times, you can have up to 3 of its non-instantaneous effects active at a time. The sensory effect, you get to create a harmless sensory effect, such as a shower of sparks, a puff of wind, faint musical notes, or an odd odor. You can instantly light or snuff out a candle or torch or a small campfire. You can instantaneously clean or soil an object no larger than a cubic foot. You can chill, warm, or flavor up to a cubic foot of non-living material for 1 hour. You make a color, a small mark, or a symbol appear on an object or a surface for 1 hour. Or you can create a non-magical trinket or illusionary image that can fit in your hand. It lasts until the end of your next turn. A trinket can deal no damage and has no monetary worth. those are all of the abilities that you get as a gnome. Again, we've seen how they've taken some of the lore and put it into the mechanics. The rock gnome, even the spells, very much leaning into this idea of tinkering and things like that. And the forest gnome leaning into nature, such as speak with animals and things like that. But ultimately, the mechanics are great, but we do want to be able to differentiate our gnomes from other characters in the way that we present them to the rest of the party. So I've put together a list of 10 questions that you can ask yourself to try and make your character a little bit different from that of your fellow party members. So first of all, what is your relationship with your lineage? You will have decided that already. And how does that lineage shape your personality, your abilities, and your worldview? We have an idea a little bit about abilities in terms of features and things like that. But does this shape perhaps where you might place your various ability scores and things like that? And that's going to affect, of course, your character's ability to deal with certain situations and perhaps your personality. But also, how does it affect your worldview? If you're a forest gnome, for example, are you more protective of nature? If you are a rock gnome, are you more interested in industry and productivity and things like that, for example? What does that mean to you in that regard? How do you view the gods who created your kind? Do you honor the gods like Glitter Gold, Wild Wanderer, and Cloak Shadow? And have you ever felt their presence or sought their guidance? Is your character religious, or are they not? Does your character worship them or not? If so, how close do they feel to those gods? And that's regardless, by the way, of whether or not you're playing a cleric. I think it's very easy for non-clerical or non-paladin characters to forget that their character may very well still worship some gods and which ones are important to them in that particular instance. How does your magical nature influence your daily life? Do you use your magic for practical purposes, trickery, invention, or simply just to entertain yourself and perhaps others as well? What's your perspective on size and cleverness? How do you compensate for your small stature in a world of larger creatures? Is this something that you do compensate, or do you not need to? Do you have a chip on your shoulder, perhaps, about your size? Perhaps a little bit of little man syndrome, perhaps? Do you pride yourself on outsmarting those who underestimate you? This kind of reminds me a little bit of Tyrion Lannister, who is small, and I remember in one of the early episodes of Game of Thrones him saying to Jon Snow, "I'm not a warrior. I'm not going to beat anybody into submission, but my greatest weapon is my mind." And does your gnome feel the same way? Where do you feel most at home? Do you prefer the comfort of burrows, dense forests, or tinkering workshops? Or are you drawn to explore beyond the traditional gnome environments? We know, of course, that gnomes like to have a roof over their head. So where is it most that you're going to feel most comfortable? Or where do you feel like a fish out of water? Forests, for example, might be something for you to talk to your DM about. Maybe they might even give you a little bit of a kind of situational advantage, perhaps, if you're really nice to them. Talking about forests and doing nature checks in forests and things like that might be something worth discussing with your DM. And if they're open to it, that could be pretty cool for you. You know, where is it that your gnome likes to spend their time? Because that could make for some interesting decisions when you're traveling across country, for example. And do we stick to the road or do we cut through the forest? Your gnome might be like, oh, forests are my home, so let's just go through the forest. What's the worst that could happen? Which is one of those great decisions that you know as players is probably not the wisest move, but for your character absolutely would be. It's the suboptimal choice mechanically, but probably from your character's perspective, the only choice to make. And those moments can be quite fun. What motivates your cleverness and creativity? Are you driven by curiosity, the thrill of invention, a desire to help others, or the need to solve problems? Do you pride yourself on being a problem solver? Do you pride yourself on your kindness? Are you just an intellectual that just wants to understand the world a little bit more, or maybe even leave your mark? How do you interact with other creatures? Are you secretive and elusive? We've talked about how gnomes have been secretive in the past, keeping themselves hidden. Or are you more open and eager to share your talents with others? Are these secrets of your kin ones that you like to keep to yourself, or ones that you like to share with others? Perhaps even to elevate yourself in wider society, perhaps. What role does humor play in your life? Gnomes are mischievous in nature at times, and do you embody that mischief or trickster spirit? Or do you have a more serious, pragmatic approach to life? I think it's always interesting when you can create a character that leans into certain tropes and breaks others. What happens if you have a kind of grumpy gnome as opposed to that kind of happy-go-lucky gnomish character that so many will play, that kind of instigator character where it's, oh, there's a button to push, what does it do? Or what happens if you're actually playing a gnome that's really grumpy? And I think it would be really entertaining if they had a really whimsical name as well, which implies that when you see them, they're going to be a barrel of laughs, but actually they're just completely miserable. And what do you value most? Invention, illusion, or connection to nature? Now, this might, of course, be informed by the gnomish subtype that you choose, the forest or rock gnome. Are you more focused on creating physical wonders with your invention, mastering the magics, your God-given magics, or living harmoniously with the natural world? And again, these sorts of questions are important because what it will allow you to do is when you are in social interactions and talking about selecting, perhaps the DM's giving you a choice of quests to go on, this sort of question is going to help you inform yourself as to which quest your character is most likely to go on. Because sometimes we'll choose them based on, oh, that interests me as a player, but also what's going to interest your character. What is going to further their goals? If it is a choice of going to a tower to learn some magical secrets to further this cause versus going to protect a warren that is being defiled by monstrosities in the forest, your gnome, if you are all about living with the natural world, is probably going to want to head to the warren rather than the tower. But vice versa, if you have a gnome who values invention and illusion perhaps the most, then going to the tower to learn those secrets is probably going to be much more appealing than going to protect the warren, for example. So these questions are really important because it helps you to make those sorts of in-game decisions that could affect the wider trajectory of the campaign. And how do you view your place in the world? Do you see yourself as a guardian of secrets, an innovator, or a small yet vital piece in a larger story? And how does your long lifespan, up to 425 years, shape your perspective on the world around you? You've got 4 or 5 times the lifespan than a human. And so perhaps when you're interacting with humans and they're talking about the things that they hold dear, perhaps your view on that is, well, it's not going to be important to you guys in 80 years, but this thing that I'm trying to work towards protecting is still going to be around in 300 years' time. So actually, if you don't mind, I'd rather focus on that than what you're working on. But equally, as a gnome, perhaps you don't see things that way. And perhaps actually you're just a small piece of this larger story. And perhaps your gnome does just go with the flow and just see where life takes them. These are the sorts of important questions that are going to help you to make some important decisions within the game world, and not thinking as a player, but actually thinking as a denizen of this imaginary world that we're all sharing. Those are the questions, the role-playing prompts for gnomes. I hope that you found that helpful. These questions will help you to differentiate yourself from perhaps other characters and other species within the D&D multiverse, and really help to up your role-playing game as you are playing through and playing as these different characters and making one feel very different from the other. So I hope that you found that helpful. If you would like more videos of this, or indeed if you have some of your own concepts of gnomes, do leave some ideas in the comments. Perhaps you have some more questions that you think would be really useful. Drop them in the comments as well. But importantly, if you like this sort of video and want more, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. And also, I am going to be putting together a worksheet where you can print that out, doodle and scribble your notes on it about these gnome questions. You can find that. I'm going to put a link in the episode description of this gnome video. Head on over to there. That will sign up to the free category of Patreon, or if not, be a full supporter if you like as well. That'll always be welcome. But you can download it for free at patreon.com/bardicquest. So thank you very much for tuning in to this video, and we will catch you next time.